All right. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I am excited to share some highlights from our research report created in partnership with FMI titled Harnessing the Data Advantage in Construction. I'm Eric Thomas, manager of construction thought leadership at Autodesk, and I'm also the host of Autodesk's Digital Builder podcast. I've been supporting the AEC industry for nearly a decade. I've worked for two top E&R ranked general contractors, and I've been with Autodesk for just shy of 4 years. And during that time, I've had the pleasure of collaborating with my co-presenter today, Jay Bowman, on 3 industry research reports, most recently focused on data and construction. And also, if you're into podcasts, you can find Digital Builder wherever you listen to them. Our most recent episode includes an even deeper dive into data and construction.
Thank you, Eric. And I would just echo that. It's been my pleasure working with you over the past several years, developing what I consider to be, rather unique insights into what contributes to success in the construction industry. And for those of you on here who may not know me, I'm a partner at FMI. We're a management consulting and investment banking firm that's dedicated exclusively to the built environment. And as Eric kind of mentioned, I lead FMI's research and data analytics team and really look forward to sharing the findings of this, our most recent collaboration.
So today we'll cover the what and why behind adopting a data strategy, followed by a brief overview of what we learned from this global research project. We'll also cover insights from industry experts that were interviewed during the research, closing with actionable guidance on how to begin making improvements to your own data strategy. And as a little bit of a spoiler, taking advantage of this data opportunity is actually a lot more straightforward than you might expect. And before we jump in, I also wanted to briefly share why we do this type of research at Autodesk, including what inspired us to focus on data for this specific project. And what our team realized is while many working in our industry commonly express having challenges with data management, there wasn't a lot of clear intel on what was causing the problem. In the increasing need for rapid decision making in the field, we saw that many are making decisions without leveraging data and wanted to better understand why. And what we found was the ability to utilize data in an insightful manner is no longer a nice to have. It's a primary advantage in construction for staying competitive. And most industry leaders do recognize the need to make improvements to how they manage data, but many are uncertain of where to begin.
Yeah, and I think, Eric, you really hit it on the head there, that this truly is not one of those nice to haves. I mean, the world is advancing around us, and those who are really figuring out how to really harness data in a way that improves their organizations truly do see more competitive advantage in the development of their organizations and their ability to compete in the marketplace. And one of the things that also initiated this research is just the exponential increase in data that's being produced on projects. Whether we're talking about in the field or in the office, it's just truly astounding. But I think it's also understandable. I mean, given the ever expanding adoption of technology that we're seeing on project sites and in the office, more than 80% of the respondents to our survey said, yeah, we're seeing an increase in project data in our organizations, through all the things that we're collecting from all these different sources. And more than half of the people that we surveyed said, yeah, we've seen an increase of over 50% in just the past 3 years alone. Now, all this data includes a broad range of things. I mean, whether we're talking about BIM inputs, material quantities, safety incidents, RFI data, schedules, change orders, you name it, all those things, there's a ton of it. However, what needs to be understood, and I think what was really recognized by the over 3,000 people that participated in this, that they understood that quantity of data is not the same thing as quality of data. And it's the quality of the data collected that is often the most questionable. And you may first interpret that when we say quality of data, somehow we're suggesting like bad data. Well, that meaning might be a little bit inaccurate because bad data, while it does have sort of means hey, this was bad data, and since it was inaccurate, it also is characterized by a lot of other things. It might be incomplete data, it might be missing some aspect. Could be the wrong data. We're bringing in the wrong information at certain times, or frankly, we just can't access it. So in other words, it just can't be used to provide some type of information or gain some new insight. And most respondents described that at least 25% of their project data fell into this sort of quote unquote bad category. Now, most, I think, also recognize the power of good or usable data. And this is where the need for formal data strategy really becomes apparent because collecting good or usable data is only one part. That data strategy has to include those things about how the organization plans to not only manage that information once it's collected, but how to use it. And when we talk about using it, meaning using it to make better decisions and sort of avoid the avoidable mistakes, if you will.
So we'd like to do a quick poll to to everybody attending to see who has implemented a data strategy themselves and see how it compares with the respondents from our research. Apologies, having a slight technical difficulty on that poll. And I guess we're just going to have to move on. My sincere apologies for that. But you might be asking, how will data strategies help you? The good news is that implementing one can do a lot more for standardizing workflows. It can improve outcomes for your business. This might include a reduction in safety incidents by having better, more accurate data to evaluate. You may see improvements in quality assurances when your data is centralized and not lost in disconnected silos. You can also improve your reporting capabilities, where data becomes even easier to interpret for all stakeholders at both the project level and the organizational level. And finally, your data is something you can control. It's an element of your business where making improvements can potentially improve margins and profitability.
Yeah, and as Eric just mentioned, I mean, there just really is tremendous value in how we can leverage this data to make better decisions and again achieve better outcomes. I mean, that's the whole end game, right? But moreover, I think the other aspect that we learned is it really contributes to, let's say, a culture or even an environment of collaboration and continuous improvement. For example, during one of the interviews that we conducted as part of this research, someone had shared with us how leveraging their project data allowed them to identify sort of various, key performance indicators that would alert them when a project might be kind of going off track or might put them in jeopardy. And so these red flags that could, throw up at a time would help allow them as a team to say, well, how can we respond to this not only before any damage was done, but as a team, how do we best respond to the issues? Now, this does require, a lot of alignment and commitment throughout the organization. And time again, harnessing the power of data was described as much as a mindset change as anything else. But some even compared it to, hey, this is no different than how we might think about safety, meaning that we don't just tell people, hey, here's why you should be safe and maybe training them on how to be safe. Safety really for most organizations just becomes a way we do things. It's a culture or a mindset within the organization. And this is why successful data strategies kind of have a very similar, I'll say, holistic approach, if you will. So it includes developing whether it's data literacy skills, understanding why, leveraging data is important, the role everyone plays in it, and sort of the ongoing effort to make it, the way we do things, kind of similar to safety. But again, it's the insights that can be gained that can truly transform an organization. And it kind of reminds me of a saying, if you'll just kind of allow me, that says talent can hit the targets that others can't, but genius hits the target others can't see. And I really believe that harnessing the power of your project data can do just that, meaning it can make you better at hitting the target, but it can also make you better at hitting the target that others can't see.
So I'd like to share a little bit more about the research, and I'm pleased to say that this was a truly global initiative, and we included 3,916 participants across 3 regions and 18 countries. We captured insights from industry leaders in North America, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And as you can see, participants in the study included all stakeholders and stages of the construction lifecycle. The range of organization sizes based on revenue was wide, covering all types of organizations, large or small.
And as with any of the studies that we've collaborated on, there's always sort of this interest in, what's the value that can be captured? Where's the so what, if you will? And there's no difference, in this time either. And we really estimate that we're talking about something that may be nearing $2 trillion in cost just last year. Now you may say, well, how did you get to this estimate? Well, we got to it by kind of taking into consideration a couple of things. First was that the cost of bad data has been estimated to be equivalent to 16.5% of worldwide GDP. That's not construction specific, that's just the entirety of it. Well, last year, worldwide GDP was roughly 84.5 trillion. So if we take the 16.5%, apply it to that, we're talking about something just under $14 trillion being the cost of bad data on a worldwide basis. So next, it's like, well, what about construction? Well, construction represents 13.2% of worldwide GDP. So if we assume that, as an industry, our share of the cost of bad data is the same as our share of GDP, that's how we get to that 1.84 trillion number. Now, another way to estimate the cost of bad data is through rework. And one of our previous studies that Eric and I worked on revealed that poor project data and miscommunication is responsible for almost 50% of all rework in the US. Well, total construction spending across the globe was about $12.5 trillion in 2020. And Navigant, another consulting firm, has estimated that about 5% of this is spent on rework alone, or the equivalent of $625 billion. Now, of course, bad data is not responsible for all rework. I mean, there's weather delays or weather incidents, there's material or equipment defects, etc. But a McKinsey study also suggests that around 43% of organizations do not consistently make high quality decisions. And so we were intrigued by that, and we coupled it with the research that we did here that said, well, you know what? About 1 out of every 3 poor decisions was a result of bad data. So we combined those things, the 43% of firms not consistently making high quality decisions, and then also suggesting that, hey, you know what? There's a lot of these that are a result of bad data. Therefore, the cost of rework associated with bad data may be equal to about $89 billion. Now, at the end of the day, these numbers are, they're impressive, they're big, but they don't really mean anything unless we put it into the context of the individual organization. What does it mean to me and my company? So if we apply the same assumptions that we just went through for just the overall cost of bad data and rework, but now we take revenue and use that rather than construction spending. If we use the example of $1 billion company, we're talking about $170 million in potential savings. And the construction industry, as we know, is already characterized by thin margins. So the ability to find profit pockets anywhere we can that can help enhance those margins is so valuable. Now, these can be found either by playing really good offense and how we set things up, and it can also be played by very good defense. How do we keep the money from falling out the bottom of the bucket? And leveraging the power of data is, in our opinion, one of the best defenses that can be employed, to improve those margins. Now, as I kind of previously mentioned, we're already capturing a lot of data. And so that's kind of a good thing. This is not something new we have to go get. We're getting this information, this data. So the question is, how can we use it to help, our firms have less waste, be more profitable, which means we're being probably better managed, we're being more efficient, more productive, all those good things. And again, those examples of the data that we're already or most likely collecting, again, measurements, observations, BIM inputs, material quantities, safety incidents, RFI schedules, you name it, whether it's coming from photos, computers, drones, emails, you name it. We've got a ton of this information and you're already collecting it. The question though is it the right data, right? So let's talk about how the data that you have, or maybe that you could have and can, and how that should be used, and also why operating with a formal data strategy on top of that is so essential.
All right, so I'm going to try this again, and hopefully I push the buttons in the correct order so we can launch that poll. But we wanted to better understand the most common blockers that you've experienced when implementing a data strategy. So let's see how that works. We'll see a couple more answers roll in, and then I'll hand it back over to Jay to compare it to how our survey respondents in the research project shape up. All right, we've got about 30% of the votes coming in. If you want to jump in and push the button, we'll we'll get moving from here. I sincerely appreciate it. All right, so the results are back, and it looks like not being sure about where or how to start was our leading option.
Well, that's really interesting. And in fact, I would say that, from our survey that we had, it was sort of I don't want to say a tie, but, the top three, around the costs, again, just like the people on here today, being not sure where or how to start, and then sort of the leadership or organizational support. And I think it's important to understand that, that's absolutely correct. And I think what we just observed, from this group is that, being able to know how to move forward and what was that common data barrier. When we looked at the interviews, the one that came out most was exactly how this group answered, meaning, where do you start? That was the biggest challenge. It just seems so overwhelming. As we've kind of mentioned already, how much data is already being collected. And it's like this mountain of information. Where do I even begin? And that may be the reason why in some of the surveys that we saw, there might be a lack of leadership or organizational support. But that was kind of interesting when you start to separate this out between, say, the larger firms, meaning maybe those over $500 million in revenue, and those that were smaller, maybe less than $25 million in revenue. And for those larger firms, the number one reason was the fact that we had this lack of leadership or organizational support. And that's pretty understandable given sort of the size of these organizations and how much alignment there has to do to kind of move something like this. For the smaller organizations or smaller firms, where there's fewer people to convince, things can be done a little bit, I'll say, easier in sense of decision making sometimes. It was really more the perceived cost and the resources that was the number one reason why. But even those who do have a data strategy, who've sort of been able to overcome some of these barriers, if you will, to start to do something and implement a formal data strategy, they still encounter challenges that I think are important for anyone who's considering doing this or in the process of doing this. So what would be some of those things that we'd have to think about? And really kind of came down to a couple of things. First was, I'd say number one was, how do we collect and manage the data efficiently and effectively? And again, it wasn't about the quantity of the data, it was really about the quality. And not only the quality in the data itself, but in the quality in the application or the use of that data.
So Jay made a point a moment ago that I'd like to come back to. And since an important topic is data literacy, it's a key element of today's construction environment. And understanding how to interpret data and use it to make decisions is already a big part of how many get their work done. And that will only increase with time. Fortunately, having these skills improves the way our industry gets their work done. But as you likely know, sometimes it can be challenging to convince everyone of that point. We found that having access to accurate data that's presented in an understandable way is a common factor for many successful organizations, but to get there, they had to empower their teams with the right knowledge and tools. So showing your team that technology and data can positively impact their ability to make decisions, meaning they're saving time, improving efficiency, reducing waste, and preventing rework. Ultimately, this makes for happy employees who go home on time to see their families and happy project owners when the work is complete. And today, technology and data literacy skills are no longer only for the VDC team. Setting up meaningful training and empowering your team with the skills to leverage data effectively can positively impact your entire organization.
Yeah, and just like Eric said, I mean, with the technology and these data literacy skills not being limited to one part of the organization, it's kind of the same thing that we saw with just organizations overall. I mean, that having a formal data strategy is not only essential, but it's useful for organizations of any revenue size, whether they're, large or small. All companies of this size can benefit from leveraging and harnessing the power of that data. And that came from the surveys, it came from the interviews, et cetera. All of them supported this. And as discussed already, what needs to be taken into account in developing a data strategy, though, may differ by that size of company. So just what we were talking about. So like, for example, we said with large organizations, typically having more stakeholders to consider, and the effort necessary to sort of gain some of that approval, which can sometimes slow the adoption of a new project, a new data management practices, particularly at the project level. So for larger firms, it's really trying to find a way to achieve that alignment sort of across the entirety of not just the leadership team, but I'd say the whole company as well. By contrast, you think about the smaller organizations where that may not be the biggest issue. They may be more nimble, or how you want to describe it in terms of the ability to make changes or decisions a little bit more quicker, because there's fewer people to get on board. But for the smaller firms, what really has to be shown there is, well, that it's actually more costly, let's say, because remember, cost was for the major inhibitor to doing something like this. But maybe you kind of flip it around. You say, well, for smaller firms, how is it actually more costly not to have a formal data strategy in place? Despite some of the hesitation that might be associated with the cost of implementation. So, for example, what's the cost of not making better decisions, or not making jobs easier, not being productive, not being efficient? I mean, all these things, going back to what we started at the very beginning about this creating competitive advantage, it's not a nice to have. This is going to be a need to have, and this is now, and this is pretty much the future.
So I hope that the advantages that come from data are a little bit clearer now, but many of you might be wondering what comes next. And fortunately, during our research, we were able to identify 4 key steps that organizations commonly used when successfully implementing a data strategy. And these steps can help your team find areas of focus to reduce decision paralysis, which is a common feeling regardless of company type or size, and begin improving your approach to managing data at your organization.
Yeah, and I actually was happy to see. Well, I say happy, but it worked out well that the reason for not selecting or not implementing a data strategy was that question of, today with this poll around where do you start? How do you begin? And through all the people that we spoke with who were successful in implementing a data strategy, one of the characteristics that they all shared was that the first thing they kept in mind was, for it to be truly successful, is to start small. It is almost too big an issue to try to do everything at one time. So it really began with, these companies deciding, where can our organization most benefit from some type of data-driven insight? And so they were able to make the case, by starting with one thing or just a few things. And so taking that first attempt of not only saying, this is what we're trying to accomplish, a data strategy being the means to accomplishing that, but really having a clear sort of return on investment. And a lot of them began with things like quality assurance or maybe safety, because these, frankly, were 2 areas where the data was really readily available. And so, taking that single point of focus really directed the efforts of individuals in the organization so that they could really appreciate sort of the impact of those improvements. And so all this gets down to kind of, if you listen to Simon Sinek, around, understanding why. And I mean, answering questions like, well, what do you want to do better? What's that one thing? And then being able to say, well, what would look different if you were able to actually leverage your project data and generate insights? How would your company be different? Who could you potentially consult for advice when beginning this process? Are there other, firms like peer groups that may have gone through this? Your attorney, your accountant, are there others that can help you think through how would we begin this process? And then last, what are some of those tools that you already have that, exist within the organization that you might be able to use to accelerate the implementation of the data strategy? Now, as with any strategy, I think of it as it's the roadmap to the destination, right? It is not the goal in and of itself. So it needs to include sort of 3 big areas, this data strategy, if you will, where the obstacles that we're most likely to encounter, how are we going to either minimize them or eliminate them altogether so that we're reaching that destination. And so the first one is around, how are we collecting the information? That needs to be as much a part of the strategy as anything. But then once we've collected, how are we managing it? What format are we keeping it? How are we updating it? All those types of things. But then at the end, it doesn't matter if we've collected a lot of good information, we're managing very well. How are we analyzing and actually using it? And these become much more manageable with that focus that we're talking about on just one or maybe a few goals. And another benefit of having that smaller focus that was shared in the interviews, but I also think is kind of illustrated pretty well in this book called Micro Mastery by Robert Twigger. If anyone's familiar with it, he talks about whenever you're starting or something new or learning something new, and we could say that leveraging data is one of those things. He always talks about the need for finding a quick payoff, meaning that there's something where I've shown that, hey, I've got it, this works, I can do it. And I think that's important for a data strategy as well. Have that quick win, if you will. It's what motivates people to keep going. Excuse me. And then second, as I mentioned earlier, this is as much a cultural shift as potentially an operational shift. Therefore, you really have to get buy-in from all the potential users. This is important to reduce that hesitancy that often comes with anything new in an organization. It's not just the project team, it's everybody. Because frankly, data across your projects are probably touched by a lot of different people. And achieving that buy-in and including sort of the project team in the decision making ensures that it's not going to really be biased, against, say, one type of solution or one group. It's one of those things where we want everyone to have a stake in it and understand how, their role influences that, but also how they benefit from it. So, gathering feedback from end users was a big part of a lot of these successful data strategies, but also demonstrating the benefits of how this plan really impacted each person very specifically, like how your daily tasks change. But it was not kind of a one and done. There was need for kind of continually reinforcing, sharing wins, whether they were big or small, to show how everyone is kind of winning together. And then the last aspect, really training people, was so critical, because these are new schools. These are new skills for a lot of people. And so formal training or education might be a very necessary component. And as we all know, at the end of the day, construction is about the people. It's a people business. And so that human-centric approach is so necessary. And I love this quote that came from one of our interviews, and how that, buy-in is really best achieved when people can see and how it benefits them, making their day better, being more efficient, more productive, all those types of things. But it doesn't stop there either. So, Eric?
Yeah, and so the third step is standardizing the way that your team captures data across projects. Another common trait shared by leaders who successfully implemented a strategy was that the way they captured data was consistent across all of their projects. Many participants in our study indicated feeling overwhelmed with the sheer volume of data they collect, and that makes sense when there's no guidance on how it should be captured. So clearly defining how your team should format, capture, and process data will ensure that you can evaluate it at the organizational level instead of being stuck using data for in-the-moment project-level decisions and ultimately leaving any lessons learned behind when the project is finished. So finding a way to evaluate your existing data for accuracy and cleaning it to ensure that it's correct should be another key element of your strategy. Appointing a data champion internally can really boost adoption, especially when the value of this work is clearly communicated to the team. And for those out there who have listened to the Digital Builder podcast, first off, thank you, but you'll certainly have heard me use the words intentionality. I joke about how often I say it on the show and that I should set aside $1 every time I do, but the point is an important one. When you begin your data journey, you must be intentional and ask questions like, what data do we want and what do we want to do with it? And what would look different if we were able to leverage our project data and generate actionable results from it? It's important to have a clear understanding of what your team wants to do better and how a data strategy will help these goals. Without thinking about your future state, it's hard to make choices on where to begin. And the final step is adopting a common data environment, or CDE. The BIM wiki defines a CDE as a single source of information used to collect, manage, and share documentation, the graphical model, and non-graphical data to the whole project team. Today, the value of a CDE extends beyond BIM and includes all types of project data. So leveraging a CDE facilitates collaboration between your project team members. And when your data is centrally located, moving it away from disconnected data silos, it helps avoid data loss and the creation of more unusable data. And it can't be understated how impactful centralizing data in a CDE can be for your organization. Choosing a CDE and complementary technology solutions with real integration capabilities will facilitate the flow of data across the entire project lifecycle. It will provide readily available, accurate, standardized data, and ultimately it empowers you to create better turnover packages when the project is finished. Additionally, all of the work you've put into bringing quality data into a central location will make the adoption of advanced technology even easier. This includes tools that leverage artificial intelligence, augmented reality, machine learning, virtual reality, and a whole lot more. The future of construction is in the data, and having a formal data strategy may soon be a requirement to remain competitive. So in closing, the research shows that you may have a tremendous opportunity to bring meaningful changes to your business with data. And personally, I think it's an exciting moment for our industry. Also, there's so much more in the report that we couldn't cover today, so be sure to read it. We'll send everyone who registered a link to download it, including an additional link to an audiobook version if you want to check it out while you're on the go. And with the remaining time that we have, we'd love to answer a few questions about the research, so please enter any into the questions window if you've got some for us. Let's see which questions are coming in right now. So Jay, I've got one to kick to you to start us off. Should people start on a project that's already in progress, or do they have to wait for a completely new project to get this project going?
It's a great question. And in fact, we found several people we talked to who went ahead and started on projects that were active. I mean, what some people told us, but I think it was probably characteristic of everybody, is that if you're waiting for sort of the best time or the ideal time to start this, it's kind of a fool's errand. You know, there is no best time. You just have to kind of start. And so some people did start in the middle of a project, just saying, "Hey, there's probably things that we can do better." So I don't think there's a best time. It's just whenever you can.
Yeah, I think that focus is really what's important. So regardless of where you're at during a project, you have a lot of opportunity to make improvements and you learn from those, and then you get to apply them on the next project to, have an even better foundation as you move forward. Somebody asked if there's going to be any use cases on how to capture the power of data. There's a whole lot more in the report that we really couldn't get into the weeds here today, including some case studies of successful organizations who undertook this. So that's a great place to get started. The next question that came in, I'll take the first stab at, Jay, and it's simply, how long does it take? And I don't think there's a great answer as far as 1 month, 2 months, 5 months, 6 months, because a data strategy is an iterative process. So it's not implementation takes 1 month or 2 months. There's no endpoint, but your data strategy really should evolve as you learn and grow with your team. So you figure out what your early wins are at the beginning, basically narrowing that focus on those attainable improvements, and then you build from there. So that quick win, as Jay alluded to earlier in our conversation, really does give you the leverage to go org wide and convince others across your team of that value. So there really is no endpoint. It's just a growing and iterative process. Jay, do you
Yeah,
have any additional thoughts on that one?
yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's why, the term strategy is included in this, because just like a corporate strategy, we never, build a strategy for our organization. And then once it's done, we feel like, we never have to do strategy ever again, because the context changes, the world changes as new information comes in, things, different types of projects, whatever it may be. Like to your point, I think when you said, it's an iterative process is exactly right. And that's what people, that we interviewed said the same thing is they kind of mastered one thing and then that kind of led to another thing. Sometimes it didn't lead to the thing they thought they were going to because they learned something new, but it was this kind of continual sort of improvement process that they were on.
So we've got another question that came in that I think actually ties back to the last research project that Jay and I collaborated on. So I wanted to include this one in here, but the question is about how do you include your most common collaborators in this process? And I think it's first an internal focus where you're gaining trust within your team, you're iterating and building, and then once that process is dialed in, then you can expand that to the wider team. So whether that's stepping out to different projects or other contractors or owners that you work with, I think building that use case internally really gives you that foundation to convince others to come along with you, regardless of if they're on the project and internal to your organization, or as you get better at this, external to your organization as well. And you should absolutely check out our last project about trust in construction if you're interested about building that trust, because we've got a lot of really great guidance on how to accomplish that both internally and externally as well. Let's see, there's a whole lot coming in. I think we've got time for one additional question. Jay, I'm going to kick this one to you. Where can I have the biggest impact with the least effort or change?
I see why you gave that one to me. You mean loaded one. Well, to me, and I say to me, it's what I heard from like others talking about. I would kind of go back to, where most people started, which was with QA or with safety, because generally that's more standardized data that you're collecting. So as you mentioned, one of the steps was around, making sure you had a standardized process, you had good data, all those types of things. Generally, safety and QA had some of those things, but they had huge payoffs. So, for example, one of the people that we spoke with, I don't know if you recall the story, you probably do, but they were talking about, they were just looking at the number of defects per like $1 million, of work they were doing. And so we're not talking about like, huge, lots and lots of data to look at. It was simply that. It was, they were able to kind of look at some information and say, you know what, when we reach a certain number of defects per $1 million, that's when things go bad. And it was as simple as just using that type of data, so that, again, it didn't tell them what the answer was, but it at least alerted them when they needed to be thinking about it. Problems don't get better with age, and so the sooner they could identify it, the better. And through that, they were able to expand into other areas and look at ways. But it also goes back to what I said, the importance of a quick win, because when their team saw that, and then there was less bad projects to try to recover from because projects were, corrected before they went bad. Even the team members are saying, "Hey, I've got ideas. We could do this too. We could do that." So I think of it as saying, where do we kind of already have pretty standardized information, and where can we kind of just do something very simple, like a one-to-one?
And Jay, I have to chuckle when you said it's a loaded question, but you're absolutely right, simply because this is often very organizational and situational in nature to help identify where you start. And so it would be difficult to apply a blanket statement to how all organizations should consider this at the starting level, simply because every organization is different. They might leverage different technology. They may be at a different level of data maturity as far as how much they capture or collect. And so you've got to step back and really look at, what are we doing today and what do we want to do tomorrow? And that will really help you narrow your focus into something that feels more actionable, attainable as a single point of focus to get started. All right, I've got one more that slipped in that I like, and then I'm going to let everybody go. And see, we still have a lot of people on the line, which I'm happy for, but I think this is a good question. And it's, do you need train data professionals to collect and analyze data, or is it better to have people within organizations to do that? And I'll take a first stab at it, and then I'd love Jay to share his thoughts too. And again, I think that's situational too. So larger organizations, if you're a billion-dollar general contractor, there's likely a lot to consider, especially if your data strategy isn't robust. And so if you have the resourcing to bring in people who can help you along the way to, streamline and improve your data practices and give an honest assessment of where things sit, I think it's a great option if you have the resourcing to do that. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that not all organizations have that level of resourcing. So a small specialty contractor might not be able to bring in a consultant to help them. But find people who are data literate within your team, identify those champions, and really build on that cadence. Because once you identify the value and you really have that honest assessment of where you're at and where you want to go, I think you're in a really great position to build on that and really implement a meaningful data strategy. Jay, do you have any thoughts on that one before we close out for the day?
I mean, not really anything else I would add. I mean, other than the fact that, you know, that's why I think most people said start small, right? I mean, and I think the training aspect and the data literacy, yeah, you may have to get, someone to help begin with that, but do they have to be on staff? I don't know. So I really think, like you said, it goes back to where do you start? What are we trying to do? And then those types of things will come out of like, okay, is that too big a thing to start with? Can we start smaller? I think it really just gets back to the issue is more situational than anything else.
Absolutely. So that's it for this conversation today. But as I mentioned a moment ago, we'll be sending a follow up with a link to the full report, which has a ton of great information in it. In addition to that audio book, if you want to listen to it when you're working out or on the move or something along those lines. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out if you've got any other questions. Jay and I are absolutely passionate about this topic, and we spent a lot of time really understanding the data that we gave, the data about the data, essentially, which is a funny. Funny statement to make. But either way, I sincerely appreciate everybody's time and have a great day.